Most spiritual teachings, especially Enlightenment teachings, are really only about transcending the experience of incarnation. In other words, realizing I'm not this body, I'm not this mind. Who I am at the deepest level of my being is that unmanifest, empty mystery that is untouched by the ravages of time, and I'm always free. And so, whether in the Eastern tradition or the Western tradition, the goal of spiritual practice and spiritual development has always been some form of escape from physical incarnation. So, if you had originally in the Buddhist teaching, of course, he was talking about the experience of nirvana, which is really about vertical liftoff, which is about getting out of here. And we can see in the West the whole notion of going to heaven. If you live a moral life, for example, in the Christian tradition, if you live a moral life, then you'll be able to go to heaven when you die. But we have to remember that the life conditions, 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and even 500 years ago, were pretty wretched. Compared to what most of us do take for granted today, most of us can't imagine how hard, how tough, how rough life used to be. Life used to be much harder and more brutal in every way. Life was, for most people, except the rarest of the rare, the fewest of the few, one big struggle. And so you can see for many people who had to endure so much suffering, life was really about survival for most people. When you got to hear that you could go to a place where you'd never have to struggle, where you'd never have to suffer, that would be very attractive. And so it would make sense within life conditions like that. The goal of your spiritual practice would be to win freedom from the struggle and the toil of physical and human incarnation. But for those of us who are reaping the benefits of modernity and of postmodernity, and are, relatively speaking, are living lives of unprecedented, wealth, privilege, education, and personal freedom. The idea that we would seek to spirit or to God or to consciousness as a way to escape, to me, always it sounds completely ludicrous, because I think that a very big part of the modern and postmodern self, especially a very big part of our awakening, should be to realize how lucky, oh how fortunate I am. I'm the luckiest poor person that has ever been born. I am more privileged, I am more wealthy, I have more opportunity, more freedom, and more access to information than most human beings have ever had, including most kings and queens. I'm the luckiest person that has ever been born. And the other thing is that what we begin to realize is that the evolutionary process of the creative process, the energy and intelligence that initiated the creative process and that's driving the process, needs you and me, each and every one of us, to take that next step. Because we know that in the traditional era, of course, the whole notion of an absolute principle, or a godlike absolute principle, was projected outside the self up into the heavens. So we were told and we believed that there was some absolute creator or creative principle that was driving the process, guiding the process, and was going to ultimately take care of us in the end. But with the great birth of modernity, we realized that that God, or the creative principle, fell out of the sky, disappeared, and that creative principle is now emerging within our own consciousness as the stirrings of that same vibration, that evolutionary impulse, that authentic self or evolutionary impulse. And we begin to realize, and we have to have enormous humility for this, of course, is that if it's true that the energy and intelligence that initiated the creative process is what is what God is, as the urge to become, we realize that when we begin to transcend the fears and desires of our individual egos and our personal selves, and we awaken to that greatest ecstasy and that profound sense of urgency, we realize that really it is God who is feeling his or her own urgency about taking that next step within us, so that our experience then becomes that. And we realize that that's really why we're here. So from that perspective, the aspiration to want to withdraw from the creative process, to stand apart from the process so we can experience some measure of peace and freedom from the process, so we can feel a sense of relief from having to be here, is it recognized to be patently absurd. Because no, if God is the energy and intelligence that initiated the creative process, God needs us desperately and urgently to become vehicles for that energy. And so when we really begin to get this, not just intellectually, but get it spiritually, get it emotionally, at the level of experience, we feel little patience. I mean, if I can go that far, we actually begin to experience little patience with that because we realize because of how privileged we are, and because of how educated we are, and because we have the capacity to hold these very profound and inclusive perspectives, it's necessary for all of us to find ways to be here more profoundly, more intensely, and more passionately than ever before, and not just to heal the world, and not just to heal all the pain and suffering that's been created by human ignorance, but to create the future, and that's something very different. Once you experience a sense of urgency around this, you realize it's not your urgency, and then what happens is we begin to experience our own personal liberation through surrendering the fears and desires of the personal ego to this higher evolutionary urgency, which really wants our body, our mind, all our physical strength to take that next step.